From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South. I am Doris Polo. Over 100 people have been detained in Panama during popular protests. People have taken to the streets in opposition to a constitutional reform package they say infringes on their civil rights. Early on Thursday, police set up barricades around the National Assembly building, hoping to dissuade citizens from demonstrating. But people marched on the building anyway, as police responded to the peaceful march with tear gas and rubber bullets. Earlier, we spoke with Richard Morales. He's a professor of political science at the University of Panama and an executive member of the Broad Front for Democracy Party. He explained why the Panamanian people are so unhappy with the planned reforms.
This is a package of reforms that was imposed by an illegitimate committee or commission that is basically a front for the main business sector in the country. And it's basically a series of reforms that modify the country's institutions to preserve the power of the political and economic elite. Those reforms were then taken to the National Assembly, where they were worsened even more so than in their original form. They are reforms that reduce the division of powers in the country, that concentrate more power in a corrupt assembly, that reduce the recognition of human rights in the country, that deal a mortal blow to the country's social security system, to the right to water. In essence, these are reforms that gravely endanger the social rights of the Panamanian people. The last few days, there have been mass protests around the National Assembly. Those protests have been led by youth movements, by a youth sector which has found the strength to resist the repression that the government has tried to use to impose those reforms. The government has not responded to the youth sectors, to the citizens' cries for more dialogue. They have instead tried to impose those interests of the elite through those reforms on the people. They have used violent repression. There were many injured people in the violent repression that went on yesterday night. But the people have once again come out to protest today.
Students took to the streets of Bogota, Colombia on Thursday to demand that the government provides more resources for education. The protesters say that public universities are falling apart and that teachers have not been paid for a number of months. They also condemned widespread corruption in the institutions and called on authorities to step in.
People can learn from us, and they can see that our protest is righteous. They can inform themselves, and they can also join the protest and suddenly work together as Chile and Ecuador are doing right now.
Demonstrations in Chile continue despite violent repression, over which the United Nations Human Rights Delegation remains silent. Our correspondent Paula Dragnik reports from Santiago.
It's harrowing to report this kind of thing. A young girl putting together an installation has been threatened by 3 carabineros who say they were going to rape her. We arrived just at the moment, and having a camera meant that we could prevent this from happening. Unfortunately, there's no evidence beyond her testimony and tears. This is what is happening here. Where are the human rights observed? It's a good question. Evidence? There's none. It's really very difficult. This is the kind of repression that has seen so many people come out onto the streets. How can you hide? Where can you seek help? The Carabineros said it was an unauthorized protest. The leaders in charge were in the square. I don't know if we can return to where this occurred to see the installation of photographs of people killed by repression, made with balloons and candles. If we can't, we only have the testimony of Javiera, who generously spoke to us. This is the impossible situation here in Plaza Baquedano in Santiago de Chile.
That was our correspondent Paula Dragnik with that report. The Bolivian Communications Minister Manuel Canelas has condemned opposition leaders for constantly changing their position. The minister was speaking after opposition figure Luis Fernando Camacho's latest remarks calling for another election. Canelas called for the Santa Cruz Civic Committee leader to be more responsible and serious with the political positions he takes, given the tense climate in Bolivia at the moment.
Last time, Mr. Camacho said he would propose new elections with Evo Morales as a candidate. The changes of opinion Mr. Camacho has are striking. He's not being serious enough given the tense situations that we have in the country. Furthermore, these latest changes may be the most revealing, pointing out that the decisions of the President of the Civic Committee are not taken into account by members. Rather, they are taken into account by very few people who have political and economic interests.
Now, the communication minister also revealed that opposition leader Carlos Mesa was asked to provide the conditions he feels necessary in order to join the auditing process, which is taking place in conjunction with several international organizations.
Yesterday, we requested that Carlos Mesa send us his conditions in order to join and participate in the audit being carried out with the OAS and the European Union. It is clear that when an international auditing process that could change the results is being carried out, the audit has to be the final voice. I believe that everyone knows the audit is binding.
Bolivian social movements have held a vigil in defense of democracy amid concern about opposition sectors not respecting the results of the country's presidential election. Miners, campesinos, and other social organizations arrived on Thursday to Plaza Morillo from different parts of the country in order to counter opposition protests and a call for a general strike after President Evo Morales' victory. Some sectors of the opposition held a march near the vigil in support of President Morales. Part of the opposition leadership has refused to participate in an electoral audit in which they could verify the transparency of the elections. However, they have not filed a legal complaint to justify their dissatisfaction. The Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has congratulated Bolivia's President Evo Morales on his victory and rejected the destabilization attempts by the opposition. He was speaking at an international meeting of indigenous peoples takes place in Bolivia.
Evo Morales, por cuarta vez ha sido
Evo Morales has been re-elected by his people for the fourth time. 2 months ago, I called Evo because I saw about a meeting of the oligarchy in Santa Cruz on Telesur, at which they said that if Evo Morales won the elections, they would not recognize his victory. And then, losing candidate Carlos Mesa repeated it. He said on election day that he wouldn't recognize the results, and now they want to destabilize Bolivia. And they are applying the same formula they've applied in Venezuela. And Venezuela, with patience, defending peace, was able to triumph. I'm sure that the people of Bolivia, with Evo Morales, with patience, defending the constitution and peace, will also triumph like Venezuela did. Of that, I'm sure.
President Maduro also said that the indigenous people should be the soul of the greatest changes that humanity needs.
The indigenous peoples.
Displacement is on the rise in Honduras. Details after this.
A review of the world news that investigates, incites analysis, and induces criticism, because every event has a context.
Pusimos el punto en la I.
Welcome back. The latest statistics show that internal forced displacement has increased significantly in Honduras in recent years. Thousands of people are fleeing their homes due to violence from organized crime.
According to the National Statistic Institute, in the past 5 years, the number of people internally displaced due to violence increased to over 100,000. Many families tell the same story of having to flee their homes when criminal gangs try to recruit their children.
I had to walk on my own to Guatemala and then to Mexico. When I got to Mexico, it was clear this place was not right for me. I couldn't find my brothers, so I returned to Guatemala and I spent a few months in Tecumuan, in a correctional facility for minors.
Forced migration is most common in the bigger cities, where gangs operate on a much larger scale, in the same places where the government says it is working to combat violence.
Many children are displaced, with or without their families. They are victims of criminal gangs who force them into their ranks. What we see is violence directly, specifically at kids, and the response from the government continues to be extremely inadequate.
According to the Casa Alianza organization, thousands of children have fled the country in recent years due to this situation. At a rate of 2 kids per hour, they left their communities either with their families or alone in order to save their own lives.
Every day, the situation worsens. Every year, over 50,000 children drop out of school. Today, we have more children who've been deported or are migrating than we have children on the street. Just until October, 21,000 children have been deported.
Meanwhile, the government has been increasing the national security budget on an annual basis. But so far, there has been no impact on the number of people fleeing their homes.
What is clear, and despite the many variables as to why people are fleeing, is that the government is failing miserably. No matter how much money they throw at the budget, their system is inefficient.
According to official statistics, 56% of school-aged Honduran children cannot go to school due to poverty or because they are in danger of being forcibly displaced.
Shifting gears now, South Africa's Equality Court has thrown out the case in which Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan had sued opposition leader Julius Malema for calling him a dog of white monopoly capitalism. Gordhan, through his lawyers, argued that Malema should be judged with hate speech and incitement of public violence. However, in its ruling, the court said while Malema's utterances were harsh and hateful, Gordhan's legal team failed to prove that they violated the Equality Act and thereby constituted hate speech. The victims of last ethnic clashes in Ethiopia have appealed to the government to take strong measures to avoid a repeat of last week's violence. Speaking from their hospital beds, the victims also called on the government to ensure that those behind the violence are held accountable.
My brother and I was standing in front of my brother's dead body. Then they came and beat me with the stones and they slashed open my lower abdomen.
That God knows, but for me it must not occur again, because this is very bad and very severe injury, a lot of injuries. I hope it must occur again.
Moving to the Caribbean, Nevis Premier Mark Brantley has slammed the European Union's tax haven blacklist, calling it an attack on the Caribbean nation's independence. He was speaking at the ruling Barbados Labour Party annual conference.
I sound a warning here today that our hard-won independence is being slowly eroded by new and different efforts at colonial domination. The EU and others must understand that Barbados and the Caribbean do not desire confrontation and acrimony. We require genuine partnership and respect. Belgium and Germany cannot assert their sovereign right to tax their citizens at 40%, while denying Barbados its equally sovereign right to tax its citizens at 10%. It is not enough for powerful nations to say to small nations that our tax policies are harmful to them, without showing us how such harm occurs.
The premier also spoke about the illegal sanctions imposed against Venezuela as he called on international countries to respect the Bolivarian Republic's sovereignty.
We have no doubt where our dear friends, the United States and others stand on this issue impacting Venezuela. But the CARICOM position, and listen to me carefully, the CARICOM position, championed as it was by Barbados and Mia Mottley, is a position of principle. Venezuela is a sovereign state, and its people and institutions must be allowed to fashion the best solutions for their country peacefully and through dialogue.
The Bahamas is to introduce a new tax relief policy for Abaco, the Keys and Grand Bahama until June 2020. The measure is designed to stimulate the economies of those communities most impacted by Hurricane Dorian. Prime Minister Dr. Hubert Minnis has announced that individuals and businesses in these areas will be exempt from paying VAT on a range of items, from water and unprepared foods to clothing and plumbing fixtures. Fuel for generators in communities still without electricity will also be VAT-free. The start date will be announced shortly. St. Lucia's Prime Minister Alan Chastanet has said his administration has made little headway in dealing with the buggery law. Chastanet said he acknowledged that the matter has become a global issue, especially as it relates to human rights violations against the minority group. However, he explained that his government has not taken an official position on the subject, adding that he did not believe tourism would be affected. We're taking one last break. When we come back, an update on Turkey and Russia's joint border patrol in Syria. Stay with us. Welcome back. As joint patrols with Russia are about to begin in northeast Syria, Turkey has dispatched tanks to its shared border with the Arab country. Joint patrols were agreed to be carried out at a depth of 10 kilometers, but earlier this week, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said the patrols would be carried out at a depth of just 7 kilometers. YPG fighters were given a 150-hour deadline to retreat to a depth of 30 kilometers south of the border inside Syria. Turkey views the YPG as a terrorist organization because of its links to Kurdish militants in southeast Turkey and launched its offensive in early September. Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump removed 1,000 American forces, abandoning his former allies. 7 people are feared dead after a South Korean Fire Department helicopter crashed near a disputed island in the Sea of Japan. The helicopter was transporting an injured fisherman from the island of Dokdo to a hospital on the mainland when it crashed shortly after takeoff. The cause of the crash has not yet been identified, and a huge rescue operation is underway. While Dokdo is under control of South Korea, its sovereignty is contested by Japan. Dozens of people in the Palestinian city of Ramallah protested in solidarity with a Jordanian citizen who has been detained in an Israeli prison for more than 2 months without charge. The protesters have called for the immediate release of Hiba Labadi, who was arrested on August 24th while attending a family wedding in the West Bank. Tel Aviv claims that Labadi was arrested for security offenses, but it has failed to specify what those offenses are. On Tuesday, the government of Jordan recalled its ambassador to Israel in protest against Labadi's continued detention.
These protests and rallies are for solidarity with our female and male prisoners in the occupation jails, especially the prisoners who are on hunger strike, especially the prisoner Hiba Labadi, whose life is in danger. We are all hearing one voice that says that we are the prisoners, both men and women.
South Africans are looking forward to Saturday's Rugby World Cup final. That is because the national team, known as the Springboks, bids for a win against England. Our correspondent Matuba Malachi takes a look at politics behind the game of rugby in South Africa.
The 1995 Rugby World Cup memories have brought nostalgia in the now racially polarized South Africa. The country's national rugby team could not have chosen a better time to win the World Cup. It was just over a year into Nelson Mandela's Rainbow Nation project, uniting people of all races in the country. Sports has always been the one thing that united South Africans throughout the years. It's now 2019 and the Springboks, as the rugby team is affectionately known here in South Africa, will launch their bid to win the Rugby World Cup against former colonial master England in Japan. Mandela's Rainbow Nation is no more, but government is still pulling all the stops to get South Africans behind the team.
Well, you've got 57 million South Africans standing behind you.
Thank you, sir. I really appreciate the call and the support. It really means a lot to us in the team. And yeah, we'll do our best tomorrow to make you guys proud like we have been, and hopefully see you in the final.
Well, I am coming to the final. I am coming to lift that Webb Ellis trophy with you. So make sure that you book my ticket to the final. I'm going to be there.
The team managers were strategic and selected a black man to lead the team as captain. The number of black players in the Springbok team has been a debate that divided the country. It's arguably the one national team that hasn't transformed in post-apartheid South Africa. The one thing they are credited for by some commentators is their passion when singing the national anthem, which is divided into 4 of the official languages. But there's another debate that English and Afrikaans should not have been added to the anthem. The argument being that they are languages of the oppressor. While that debate rages on, all eyes will be on the team on Saturday with the hope they will bring the Webb Ellis Trophy to South Africa. Matuba Mahlachi for Telesur in Pretoria, South Africa.
That was our correspondent Matuba Malachi bringing us to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Doris Polo. Thank you for watching.